This module is about public relations, or PR for short. Now there's plenty of information in your textbook about public relations, and you need to read it. But in this video, I want to highlight some things, talk about examples, and share with you some of the experiences that I have had with public relations. But first, a scenario. I used to work for an organization where we felt that everything we did was somehow newsworthy. We were constantly sending out press releases, trying to engage reporters and get the media to cover the things that we thought was important that we were doing. More often than not, we would wake up the next morning, get the newspaper, or turn on the news program and realize our story wasn't there. And that's one of the big challenges of public relations. A company or an organization thinks that something they're doing is newsworthy and tries to get coverage of it. But the media outlet doesn't think that it's newsworthy and either doesn't do anything with it or approaches it in a different way from what the company intended to happen. Public relations, in a nutshell, is about the concept of utilizing the media. So newspapers, magazines, TV, radio, internet, those things, using those things to convey information about your company or your product or your service. It is non-paid, which means you don't pay the media outlets to run your story. Unlike advertising, which is very controllable and it is paid, where you take your ad, you write your ad, you take it to a television station or a newspaper or deliver it to a website or whatever, and they run it and put your message out because you're paying for it. Public relations is not that way. So to make it work, your topic must be newsworthy. If you're just trying to promote a product or a service that your organization has that really won't be of interest to newspaper readers or television viewers or things like that, then your public relations will probably not be successful. Think about some of the things at Ole Miss that might be newsworthy. Certainly, if a new president or dean is hired, that's pretty newsworthy. Or perhaps if a new building is being built, or there's a brand new program on campus, that might be of interest. If someone famous visits the campus, that might be newsworthy. Certainly the sports activities most people feel are newsworthy. Or if a professor invents a cure for cancer or writes a best-selling novel, that too may be of interest to certain people in a community. But let's say I put out a press release saying that I'm now teaching an online section of Integrated Marketing Communications 204. That probably isn't newsworthy. Why would someone in the community or the state really be interested in that unless I can think of a way to spin it such that it might be of more interest to their readers and their viewers? Let me share with you something that I've had success with. Some of the consulting that I have done in the past has been newsletter programs for various state and local government entities. One of my clients was the Polk County, Iowa assessor, which we did a newsletter for, a 4-page newsletter. Now I will say, first of all, that this was a very simple looking newsletter, and intentionally so, because we didn't want people thinking their tax dollars were being used to hire a marketing firm to create expensive looking pieces. But what we would do with this newsletter is we would print it and we would send it to a variety of people, but we always made sure that there were newspaper reporters on the distribution list. Look at the headline here. There was an article we did about small apartment buildings and the fact that they were being reassessed for property tax purposes. That was a very important message that the assessor wanted to get out to the community, and we were trying to think of how best to distribute the information. So we sent this newsletter, and look what happens with the newspaper. And this was just one sample of many articles that appeared. Assessments rise for small apartment buildings. The reporter took the information from our newsletter, called us and gathered up a little bit additional information, and ended up putting in an article in the paper. So in effect, the newsletter article that we wrote and promoted found its way into the media just as we intended. That's how public relations is supposed to work. Another example, I had a client that was a wine distributor, was going to Argentina and importing very high-end wines, and we were trying to think of ways to promote the wines beyond the normal distribution that we had. We had an idea that perhaps exclusive and more high-end garden centers and nursery centers might like to experiment with selling wine. Think about it. Someone that spends a lot of money on their garden and on their patio and enjoys their spending time in their yard might also be people that enjoy drinking fine wine. We had an idea for a way to try to promote this wine to garden centers, and we looked at Nursery Retailer Magazine, which is a trade publication for the nursery industry, and convinced them to write a story about the idea of expanding their business into the wine category as a way to boost revenue. We got a good article in the publication, and the program was successful in convincing a lot of the nursery retailers to experiment with wine sales. Again, we got our message out not by advertising, but through editorial and working with the publication to try to convey our information in this format. Those were the successes. I also have plenty of times that public relations didn't work. There's been many times that in my consulting business we have spent a lot of time and effort to develop a story that would be of use to the local media, and working with reporters and trying to get coverage for things that we think are important, but ultimately it doesn't work. That can be very challenging as a consultant because, number one, I can't guarantee any results for my client, and number two, if I've spent a lot of time developing this, but yet can't show results for it, that can be challenging as well. So what public relations is, but let's look at some of the specific things that organizations do to try to get their message out to the media. The most common way is through a news release or a press release. Those terms are pretty much interchangeable, and you'll probably hear me refer to it both ways. But let's take a look at what a news release is. Here's one that I found on the internet. I was not involved in this. I was just looking for an image to use in this video to convey some things. But let's take a look at it, and let's zoom in a little bit. A news release or a press release is simply a news article that an organization or an agency writes conveying the news that they want to communicate. Notice there is contact information at the top. In other words, who are you going to call? Who is the reporter going to call if they want more information? A headline is written and put on the news release. There's a city and a date that the information is newsworthy. And then the news release is actually written like a news article. This isn't where you do a lot of creative writing. Again, this is news. And the idea is you put this out to various editors, publications, television stations, websites, and things, in the hope that they'll find something interesting with it and pick it up and decide to run with that particular article. Now, sometimes they'll run the article just as it appears in your news release. And if that happens, in effect, you've written a news story. More often what happens, however, is the news release piques their interest and they call for more information and they end up writing their own story. Often when they do that, they will also contact other companies, perhaps your competitors or others, and get their take on what's going on as well. A news release is usually no more than about 2 pages long. Again, it has the headline, the contact information, and things like that, and is written, again, in the style of a news article. It's also very important to include quotes from people within the organization, because when you read newspaper articles, notice they're often quoting people. Well, it makes it easier for the reporters if you go ahead and provide the quotes. Here's another example. This is one that my company did, and we were promoting the launch of a new financial services firm. It was an offshoot of another financial services firm in the area, And we put together this news release and sent it out. And fortunately, there were successes with this one. This is a printed page from an online publication, the Business Record, that profiled the business. And there were other mentions in print publications. So that's what a news release is, and the goal is to try to get coverage for your product or service. Another thing that companies can do is put together media kits. A media kit can really be just a folder full of information, fact sheets and data and statistics and things like that often accompany news releases. In other words, the news release would talk about the specific thing that is newsworthy, the new event or new product or whatever it is, but the media kit provides more background information. So if the reporter wants to know statistics about sales or number of employees who work there or number of customers are served or things like that, they often turn to the media kit. Sometimes organizations create video news releases. Think of the news release we just looked at, which is paper and sent out. Sometimes companies will actually produce news type programs. Sometimes when you're watching a news program, you don't realize that perhaps the thing you're watching isn't something that was created by the news reporters there on staff themselves, but perhaps by another company. Now again, to do this, you can't make it look like you're really promoting yourself. You need to think in terms of what is going to be newsworthy and of great information to the viewers and the listeners. A news conference is another way of putting information out. For example, when the president has something important to say or that would be newsworthy, they will call a news conference. And a news conference is where reporters are actually invited to an event to cover the breaking announcement or whatever it is. This gives the opportunity for the reporters to ask questions and to get all the quotes and the different things that they need, and hopefully have all the information they need then to write their stories. You see this not only in political things, also here at the university and businesses and things like that. The president, the coach, or the other people will get up and give a short speech about what the news is, and the news reporters and things will cover it then. Sometimes a way to do it is through a celebrity interview. Have you ever noticed that when a celebrity has a new book or has a new movie or something of that nature, they happen to appear on talk shows or news programs? That's a very orchestrated event. Here's Tina Fey visiting with David Letterman when she was promoting her new book, Bossy Pants. Sometimes companies do sponsored events. The American Lung Association sponsors and organizes stair climbs in many cities. So in other words, the tallest building in the city will be opened up on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning or whatever, and people will race to the top of the steps and back and raise money, get pledges and raise money for the organization. But what happens is the TV cameras come out, the reporters come out, and they cover the event and talk about not only the event in the city, but of course it's sponsored by the Lung Association, or the Cancer Association has the Race for the Cure, or things like that. Those are all very good events designed to raise money, but they're also designed to get publicity and coverage in the news media. There are also newsletters, and brochures can sometimes be considered public relations. Now, sometimes students have said, well, a brochure seems more like that would fit under the advertising category, and I don't want to get into the nuances of what goes where. Is a brochure advertising or is a brochure public relations? But I would say that if you create a brochure or some kind of piece, and that is used to send out to reporters with the idea of getting coverage about your product or service, it would fall into the category of public relations. And another way to do it is through specialty vehicles. Have you ever seen the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile driving around? If this passes you on the interstate, or more likely, if you pass it on the interstate, you notice it. You may talk about it. You may create some buzz, and that's why this is a good public relations techniques for certain companies to do these things. Here's an interesting side note. My very first boss at the company I worked for out of college always said that the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile was his idea. He had been vice president of corporate communications at the Oscar Mayer Company in Madison, Wisconsin. We never knew if he was really telling the truth or if he was just making a story, but it was always fun to listen to him talk about it. But look what happens. You have the specialty vehicle out driving around. It pulls into a community, and what happens? It parks in the grocery store parking lot or wherever it is. It gives out the free product. But invariably, a reporter from a local newspaper comes out and takes a picture and runs an article. And that's exactly what this is. So look what Oscar Mayer has done. They have got their image, their logo, their brand connection in the local newspaper, or it can be on the TV station or on the websites or things like that. And they haven't paid for it. Remember, we said that public relations is not paid. Now, of course, the vehicle itself and the transportation of that and everything costs money, but it's a different way, a different tactic from, say, if Oscar Mayer had decided to advertise in a particular publication. That's why these things can be very effective touch points. Sometimes near SeaWorld, you'll see the Shamu Mobile. There's the Spam Mobile. If you're ever driving through Austin, Minnesota, which I can't imagine you will, but you could stop at the Spam Museum. I've been through it and spent hours. I had no idea that Spam had such a history and such a story and so many different varieties. Companies have chicken mobiles. A lot of times around college campuses, you see the Red Bull mobiles. Now think about this. When this is parked or when it pulls up, people want their picture taken with it. How cool is that? That a company has come up with something for people to want to stand next to their image, their logo, and take pictures. This one isn't really a vehicle, it's more of a trailer, but it's taken around to fairs and other outdoor events where people can sample the pure water. What a great way to engage customers and get them to try your product, but also you're promoting your brand. One of the more unique ones that I've heard about is the Charmin Mobile. Imagine outdoor concerts or fairs or things like that, where typically there's a lot of people and a lot of portable restrooms set up. The Charmin Mobile is a trailer that contains separate compartments for restrooms, and people can, instead of using the portable potties that aren't very glamorous, people can go into the individual compartments in the Charmin restroom. The units are air conditioned. The units are cleaned. Apparently, when one person exits the facility, an employee goes in and tidies up before the next person comes in. It's also a great way to get people to sample your product. And so I have heard when you lock the door to do your business, a video begins playing promoting the product itself. A very, very unique way for Charmin to get their name and their image and their product out there. And also maybe create some buzz about it. How many people might talk about the restrooms that they normally use? But if you have the Charmin Mobile, it can create some unique conversation. Not to keep spending time on this, but here's something that happened in the spring of 2012. It was the 100th anniversary of LL Bean's hiking boot. So the company that makes the hiking boot was celebrating their 100th anniversary. Now, that's interesting, I guess, but think about it. To get a reporter to cover something like the 100th anniversary might not seem that exciting. How many people are really that interested in it? But they created a specialty vehicle I don't know what they call it. I'll call it the bootmobile. And they drove this around. Here's a picture of the bootmobile. This is in the Wall Street Journal. It shows a picture of the bootmobile driving down the street. Bingo. You've got your story out. You've got your message across. And you haven't had to pay for the placement. Let's look at when it's good to use public relations. PR works well for new product launches or product repositions, meaning a company is trying to change the image, change the way of how you think about a particular product or a service. It certainly can be used to generate buzz. That's what the specialty vehicles do. It's also good at building and maintaining an image. And sometimes public relations is reactive. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But what I mean by this is, we think of public relations as an organization going out with a particular message or something that they want covered. But sometimes it might be the reporter calling you. Sometimes you may or may not want to talk about what the reporter wants to talk about. It's every marketing person's nightmare that the phone rings and it's 60 minutes and there's a camera out front and they want to come and talk to you about something. Some companies face particularly interesting public relations challenges. At one time, Toyota's vehicles, there was in the media a lot of negative publicity about vehicles that appeared to careen out of control. The accelerators stuck and they were having a problem with this and crashes, and several people were killed. Now imagine if you're a Toyota, all of a sudden that's what the news coverage is about. Your vehicles are unsafe. They're killing people. Now I believe, I'm no expert on this, but I believe that in later research and things showed that it wasn't actually product design wasn't really the problem here. There were other issues with the vehicles that caused the problem, but that's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is Toyota's poor public relations effort with this. One of the things that happened is it was a cultural issue. Toyota, although they have a lot of operations in the U.S., the headquarters, it's a Japanese company. And one of the things that was happening is in Japan, the news media treats companies very differently than the news media does in the United States. In other words, in Japan, the media often doesn't really question big companies or doesn't kind of go after them like they do in the United States. And so culturally, this was kind of new for Toyota to have the news media being very, very critical of what you were doing. Another thing in the Japanese culture, at least when it comes to public relations, is they tend to want to gather up all the facts before they release any information. But this story was moving so quickly. You had a situation where reporters were asking for information, wanting to know what's going on, and it appeared that Toyota wasn't responding, when in fact they were just trying to gather information and be thorough in what they do. Another nuance, so I have heard, is that in Japan, when you're very apologetic, you look down. But here in the United States, looking down or not making eye contact with reporters can be seen as it can be perceived as you're perhaps hiding something. Let's look at the advantages and disadvantages of public relations. The advantage, low cost, especially relative to advertising. There's also the credibility factor. Typically, when you see something in a newspaper or hear it on a news program, there's a tendency to think that it is more credible than if it is just an ad. Not politics. For all the negative advertising and mudslinging that goes on with politics and political advertising, there's a tendency for people to think, well, yeah, of course the candidate is just going to say good things about him or herself and paint the other candidate in an unfavorable light. That's the way advertising works. However, often when you read things or hear things on the news, there's a tendency to give it a little bit more credence, and that's with public relations. All things being equal, something will be more credible if it appears in the media than if it just appears as an advertisement or a sales promotion tactic or something else. Public relations, if it's done right, can also build good relationships with the media. It's not just about trying to contact a reporter when you have something you want them to do, but trying to develop a relationship and work with them so you know the types of stories that they cover and the types of information they need. Maybe they're doing a story on something and think of your company or your organization as the source that they might use for some information or some quotes or something like that. So it's always a good idea to try to build relationships with the media before you need them or before they need you. Something else that's going on with public relations, as the journalism business is very challenged economically, especially print journalism, I guess that's specifically what I'm referring to, newsrooms are short-staffed. They're laying off reporters and other people, but yet they still have content that they need. They have pages that they need to fill. They have airtime that they need to do. Well, public relations can help them fill that void by providing ideas and sources and resources for things that they might cover. I've always felt that as the journalism, and again, I'm specifically print journalism, but as journalism, as it becomes more challenging as a business model, that opens up more opportunities for people that are well versed in public relations because they can play some of that role. And there are disadvantages. The big one is you don't control it, or the stories can be unfavorable, or it's hard to measure. I've had that happen as well. I worked in an organization once, and we were very proud of a particular mortgage loan program for low-income and minority borrowers that we were trying to get coverage of. But the story turned into the idea that our company didn't serve minorities and low-income people very well. That's not at all the message that we wanted to convey. But because you don't control it, sometimes things can spin in directions that you don't want to. The other thing, another disadvantage, is that public relations can sometimes be hard to measure. Sure, you got a mention in a news article, or there was something done about you in on the news program, but what really did it do for you? How do you measure it? Sometimes people try to compare the number of column inches that you received in a publication or the amount of airtime you received and try to convert that to what it would have just paid for that coverage as an ad and try to do some analysis that way. But there's really a lot of challenges in doing that as well. So again, it can be very hard to measure. Finally, I just want to give a few tips and things that I have learned over the years. And this is looking at it as if you are the spokesperson for an organization. So you have either sought out publicity and a reporter has called now for more information, or maybe you haven't sought out publicity and they've called you anyway and for some reason want to visit with you about something that they're working on. That can be a little scary if you're not prepared and know what to do. And the first tip is schedule the interview in advance if possible. If a reporter calls and wants to visit with you, it is perfectly acceptable to try to ask for a little bit of time to better prepare. You don't want to, the reporters work on deadlines, so you can't delay it indefinitely. But for example, if someone were to call me right now and say, I want to come and visit with you about this, it might be best for me to say, could you give me an hour? Could you give me a couple of hours? Tell me a little bit more about what it is this story is going to be about so I can gather up some information and be prepared to visit with you. Usually they'll be very accommodating. And what that does, it gives you time to think through what your response is going to be and what you're going to do. Now the second bullet point there, of course, is recognize deadlines. Sometimes it's not always possible to do that. Or if a reporter calls and you know that they're working on something for the 5 o'clock news and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon already, you can't say, gee, could we meet at 6 o'clock? The third point is to know your talking points. Now this works not just for dealing with reporters, but for dealing with others. For example, if you go into job interviews or meetings or other situations, What you should go in with is the things that you want to talk about. No matter what they ask you, these are the 3 things, or these are the 4 things, or whatever that I am going to convey. You see this in politics if you watch debates, for example. The debate panelist will ask a candidate a question, and the candidate quickly veers to a different topic and begins talking about other things that they want to. The idea is to make sure that no matter what, you still get your point across. Next bullet point, be honest. Don't say things that aren't true. If you start lying to reporters, they're going to catch you. And then you not only have the original idea or story or whatever that you were lying about, but your credibility is going to be gone as well. Then you're going to spend your time explaining why you didn't tell the truth in the first place. Now, certainly, sometimes reporters will ask questions that you just can't answer. Maybe there are confidentiality issues or something, and it's fine to say that. But don't say no comment, or don't start trying to spin a tale and build a story that isn't quite true, because a good reporter will figure that out, and you'll be in worse shape than you started out. And finally, the most important thing is try to build relationships with reporters that you're going to be working with or that might be calling you. Just like anything else in life, when you know the people that you're working with, when you understand what their goals are and know a little bit about them, it's easier to have a working relationship with them. If you're going to be in public relations, the time to build relationships with the reporters is before you need them or they need you. This was some highlights of public relations. Again, a lot of this information is covered in your textbook. Be sure and read it. That concludes this module.